Real Country 1430 AM and 107.3 FM WRDN. Brian Winnekins from the NAFB convention in Kansas City. And thank you to our NAFB sponsors, including Osteoplastics Wisconsin Farmers Union, Wisconsin Corn Growers Association, and also Alfalfa Co-op. And joining us right now from Winfield United, Randy Welch. We're going to talk a little bit about alfalfa. And again, don't forget you can chat with the folks over at Alfalfa Co-op as well, as they're the Winfield United distributor as well in western Wisconsin. Randy, thanks for joining us. Well, first, let's take a step back here and talk about this last year, 2021. Pretty good year for us in western Wisconsin. We got the rain just at the right time.
Yeah, I think the way the season ended up, it was really a good year. So there was a month of June. The month of June was obviously really dry, but as the season progressed, we had some really nice growing conditions and had some really nice crops out of this year.
Now, as we get ready for 2022, for some of those producers that are thinking about starting a new alfalfa field, we've got some things that they got to think about with residuals from that corn crop.
Well, so there's several management things we want to talk about, and so I'd like to talk about fertility maybe first, and just mention that soil fertility is going to be really important this year because as the price of fertilizers go up, a lot of producers are really concerned about, can I afford the potash or afford the phosphorus? We need to make sure we're taking good soil tests this year, make sure we're taking grid tests where we can put the nutrients back to where they need to go, take appropriate credits for our manure credits, and then very importantly for alfalfa, to take credits for the nitrogen that alfalfa crop is producing. So an alfalfa crop will produce, a rotated alfalfa crop, even a poor stand, will produce about 100 units of nitrogen. And as we look at the price of nitrogen right now, that could be anywhere from 80 to, the projections are, could be higher than 80 cents, maybe even $1 a unit next year. So if you think about the math on just the alfalfa seed and that value of that nitrogen, as I like to call it, the salvage value of that nitrogen is very, very important as we think about raising other crops like corn.
And so that's the first thing, so that those soil tests are something that we need to get those done now.
Right, so those would typically be pulled in the fall. We can pull them in the spring, but the fall is nice because then we get time to actually make a recommendation and get the fertilizer on. With the fall that we've had, we can certainly spread fertilizer. And the other thing is lime. We've really need to stress with growers that lime is very important. And just because it's relatively, fuel's expensive and tires are expensive and all that, we need to make sure we're getting enough lime on to make sure we're getting those pHs up to neutral. A neutral soil pH should be in the 6.8 to 7.0 range before we seed alfalfa. That means we need to put the lime on a year ahead of time, sometimes 2 years ahead of time if you have low pH. If it's really low pH, we need to fix it a year or 2 years ahead of time. So quite often we want to maybe lime the old alfalfa fields. Works really well. So liming is really important. Fertility is really important. Good soil tests are important. Grid testing, be accurate with your fertilizer applications this year because fertilizer obviously is going to be more expensive than in the past.
It's a lot more complicated than just, I think I'm going to put something in I think I'm going to rotate this out to alfalfa this year. It's a little bit more complicated.
Well, find a trusted crop advisor. I think, you mentioned Alfalfa Co-op sponsoring this interview, but Alfalfa Co-op would be, have great people that are willing and able to help you with some of these more detailed, questions that you may have on your farm as far as soil testing.
Meanwhile, along with the soil testing for fertility, okay, so I plant a new crop, have a new alfalfa stand, and all of a sudden I'm calling, Randy, why is part of my alfalfa stunted here? What's going on? And it could be because of what I've done in the past for my corn and soybeans.
That's correct. So one of the things we're stressing with growers now is that as we've ramped up our chemistry to control things like water hemp in our corn and soybeans, and we're putting on more residual chemistries that do a fairly good job of controlling water hemp, as an example, and other resistant, more herbicide-resistant weeds. One of the casualties of this whole process in the last 2 or 3, 4 years as we've ramped these other chemistries up has been the casualty to our alfalfa. And new seeding alfalfa, I've gotten just numerous calls from growers saying that, well, why is my alfalfa stunted, or it seems thin, it seems slow, it just doesn't seem very, my new seeding alfalfa just doesn't do very well, or it has spots in the field that are poor. And so what we would really recommend is that farmers spend a little more time thinking about the chemistries that are being applied prior to alfalfa and read the labels very closely. And I've had a lot of farmers say over the last couple of years, well, I did this same chemistry last year and I was fine. But the differences in weather, the differences in soil organic matter, all these things have an influence on whether that chemistry may hurt that alfalfa. So we want to be really aware that if you use a chemistry that has a long residual on it, even though it's recommended for corn and soybeans, it may not be fully recommended for alfalfa. Now, the unfortunate part is the labels may not fully discuss alfalfa. And so we're kind of doing a little bit of trial and error on some of these compounds until we really figure out what the influence is on the alfalfa.
And so something like that, we could end up having to wait almost a year to get that stand to where it would be, quote, normal.
Well, in some cases, it really takes a year to kind of get them fixed. So it depends on the situation, depends on the rate of application. Again, soil organic matter is a big deal. In your part of the country, where we have a lot of sandy soils there in that part of the world, those soils be more likely to have a carryover or low organic matter soils. And we quite often see that happen where you have knolls or you have areas of the field where you have a high spot and a low spot. Low spots are great, but then the high spots have damaged alfalfa. So just be aware of the herbicide carryover risk.
Talking with Randy Welch with Winfield United, a little bit about alfalfa today from the NAFB convention. So what are some of the new things coming up in 2022?
Yeah, just to mention varieties. So one of the really important things about alfalfa, and we want to improve our alfalfa yields, of course, and one of the ways to improve alfalfa yields is to get better disease resistance in our varieties. So we've spent a lot of time here at Cropland, Winfield, to get better alfalfa varieties, better yield. And the one thing that really drives that whole equation, in addition to things we've already talked about on this interview, is disease resistance. And disease resistance means that the alfalfa plants, the roots, are able to extract more water, they're able to get more nutrients out of the soil, rhizobium bacteria are more numerous and healthy on the roots. And so the one major disease, or actually two major diseases we're working on, is a Phantomyces root rot. We've identified a race 3 or a race EMP, as the scientists call it, but it's an additional race that we've added to our new alfalfa products, and then an additional race of anthracnose. Anthracnose race 5 has been identified and being added to our new alfalfa. So when you go into the cropland information, you'll see a new variety called Rebound AA, Legendary AA, and Megatron AA. Those AA's stand for Phantomyces and anthracnose, two major diseases of alfalfa that can cause yield loss if we don't have good resistance to those diseases. So there's additional horsepower, if you will, added to those products now. So the Megatron product does carry the Harvextra trait, and it also carries the Roundup Ready trait. So Harvextra is about being able to harvest your alfalfa a little bit later, still have very high forage quality, more yield, and the Roundup Ready is about good weed control to get establishment of alfalfa.
You can talk with the folks over at Alcivia Co-op as well for more information on those new varieties. We are at the NAFB convention. I'm Brian Winnikins for WRDN.